So Agent Studio is your tool here to build agents within the Oracle Fusion ecosystem. It's designed for Fusion. It uses all the great concepts that are out there in terms of generative AI, in terms of agents and tool architectures, and brings it to you to build Fusion-specific agents and tools. And as such, it's seamlessly integrated with Fusion. For example, we have a business object tool. A business object tool is very specific to working with Fusion business objects. It knows how to read Fusion business objects, whether they're in the monolith or whether they're BOSS-based business objects or Jersey-based APIs for business objects. So it can work with the common formats that we provide within Fusion. I think everybody here is familiar with business objects. This is effectively how Oracle has delivered the data representation of their applications. And they provide REST interfaces for CRUD operations and other functions on top of that data. Inside the business object, this is where you also manage what you want to provide in that REST call to that business object. I'm sure many of you have interacted with the REST API. It's pretty large. I don't know how many of you have tried to download the whole OpenAPI spec before. It crashes your browser. But what we do is we go to the specific endpoint, we pull that OpenAPI, we read it, so we can support things like custom objects, custom fields just as well, as long as they're published from the sandbox and they're available within the Fusion environment. You'll also notice that, especially if you inherit business objects, that there's lots of fields in these things. And they're there for a reason. But it doesn't mean that your particular task or the large language model needs to know 100 different fields. In fact, it's pretty undesirable to give it that much context. So you'll go through a process of pruning, and we'll talk a little bit about that when we get into business objects. The main thing is that the Fusion integration means that when your end user in Fusion is interacting with these agents, that is the context by which the agents are operating within Fusion. So we use that user token. All the data security that's associated with that user token is preserved, which is really important when you're accessing, for example, payroll data. You want to make sure they only have access to the records that they're allowed to have access to. So you don't have to worry about passing tokens around within Fusion because that's built in to working with the Fusion-specific APIs and business objects. We also deploy these within a Fusion-specific way. So when you see these pre-seeded templates, we use the term seed because that's an area of the Fusion database in which we can provide customizations and provide definitions like business objects or like agents. So this is a Fusion-specific way to deploy applications into the environment. And we'll be going through the same process with partner agents as well. But let's talk about system prompts and topics. So prompts are, if anybody's worked with generative AI, or I mean, everybody's worked with ChatGPT, we're prompting the model, right? We're asking it, or we're giving it instructions to do certain things and generate certain types of content. When we're working with agents, we're using those instructions to ask it to do things like come up with a plan. You may have heard the term react, reasoning in action. You're instructing the agent to operate in a certain way. Take a certain goal or task, think about how it would approach that, come up with a plan, and then execute on that plan. So that's an example of how you would use the prompt. We've done a lot of these. We have a lot of experience building these things now. So we'll share some best practices with you as we go along. Each agent has a prompt. So the agent is going to be defined effectively by that prompt. So every agent has a prompt. Effectively, what you're doing in that prompt is you're defining what that agent is and what it can do. This is commonly referred to as the role and persona of the agent. So, for example, you are a human resources representative, and you are capable of doing these things. These large language models have been trained on a lot of natural language that we as humans have produced. It knows what a human resources representative is. It knows what types of tasks it's capable of. What it should do when it's faced with certain types of requests or tasks. This is when Kausha was referring to, I'm telling it when to call certain types of tools or how to call certain types of tools. as Kaushal also mentioned, these things are non-deterministic, meaning that sometimes they get things wrong. So this is the opportunity to give a very precise instructions on how to call a REST API, for example, if it's continuously calling it incorrectly. And there's a lot, I mean, obviously there's a lot you can do through these prompts. So you give it instructions. You also will tell it if it has any context that it needs to think about. This could be the context that comes from a document through a RAG search. It could be context that comes from the conversational memory that is part of the session. It could be context that comes from a business object call. All that context and that prompt are sent to the LLM every time you're making a request so that it knows the history of all those interactions. It's able to take that information and use it in the next task that is asked to perform. When we talk about prompts and topics, we just touched on that, but one of the things that is, I think, really valuable about topics is that they're reusable across agents. So for example, I have agents that are individually defined, and I want to generally tell all my agents to follow a certain instruction. Now I can go into each of those agents and update the system prompt. You know, there could be hundreds of these things, or I can define a topic and I can assign that topic to those agents. And that now gets propagated across all those agents. I can make a change later on. Maybe that instruction changes for some reason. Maybe there's a new regulatory compliance that you need to be concerned about. Manage that in a topic because you can update it and it can affect all those agents out of the box very quickly. So that reusability is a key concept of why topics are useful. The other thing about system prompts, and you probably have experienced this if you used ChatGPT or Claude Desktop, they like to be prompted in slightly different ways. Not all prompts are created equal when it comes to LLMs. Some LLMs are a little more, a little more scalable in terms of the type of language, but some are very specific. So think about that as you're switching LLMs. Your prompts may need to be optimized for that particular large language model. So in Agent Studio, we provide out of the box a set of tools. As Kaushal was mentioning, these are the actions that an agent can take. And so we define these to be the types of tools that we believe are common in the enterprise and particularly within Fusion applications. A document tool is pretty critical. A document tool is how you get unstructured content into your prompt. How many of you have built the RAG agents that we put out in 25A? Okay, so it's pretty much the same concept. You take a set of documents, you upload them, you run a job to embed them, which means we chunk them and we turn them into vectors. We store them in the customer database in the vector data store. Now we're able to do semantic searching on that unstructured data and only bring in the chunks of text that are relevant to that particular task. The business object tool is the critical tool for working with Fusion. So again, this is how you interact with your Fusion business objects. It's wired to work with Fusion. As we mentioned, these Fusion business objects have REST on top of them. You could call them with REST too, but now you're doing a lot of setup. And you're take care of managing tokens, for example, and authentication. But with a business object, all that's built in. So it's really defined specifically for working with Fusion business objects. We have an email tool. So an email tool is meant for the agent to be able to send an email. As we are getting in the early stages of these agents, so sure, there's a lot of actions they can take, but they maybe shouldn't. So email is a great way to inform human agents that the task is being passed on to them, or there's some information that you need to provide to them. So it's a way to get the human in the loop of the activity that those agents or AI agents are undertaking. We also have a deep link tool. So a deep link tool is an ability for the agent to define a location within your Fusion application to send the user if you want them to perform that action within the rich client provided by Fusion. So again, we can take these actions within the business object. I can call a post REST endpoint to set up my absences or add a dependent, but there are good reasons to send them to the actual rich client, right? Because that's the flow that's been designed to take a human through this process of adding a dependent. So oftentimes, rather than just doing the action for them, you're going to want to send them to the deep link. That will send them to Fusion. It'll send the context of that session with them as well. And then they'll take over inside that part of the rich client. We have an external REST tool. So we recognize the world is not just Fusion. External REST is how you get access to these services that are outside of Fusion. And we'll get into some details here. We provide a runtime called Trap, Token Relay, and Proxy. This is the same runtime that's used in Visual Builder if you've used Visual Builder for extending applications. So exact same runtime support there. And then we have two other tools, the user session. So this is part of your session where we're giving you context about the user. So for example, what is the user's login ID? What is the user's name? What department are they in? What day is it? Basic information that you're going to want to always use as context when you're making these requests through the agents. And then finally, we provide a calculator tool. How many people try to do math with a large language model? Even simple math. It works most of the time. But if you're depending on it to do a forecast or some type of slightly more complicated math, that often fails. So the calculator tool is there for these more complex math operations. And you want to inform it in your prompt, use the calculator tool when you see these types of formulas or equations to be able to calculate it, not through the LLM, but through the actual calculator tool.